It was a Tuesday afternoon when the meeting ended. I had just spent 6 months working relentlessly on the new project that I knew would be a game-changer for the company. Every late night, every presentation, every detail had been carefully crafted by me. I was prepared to present it to the team in the meeting that day, and the excitement in my chest had built to a crescendo. The culmination of my hard work was about to shine. Or so I thought. As I stood at the front of the room, setting up my final presentation slides, I noticed something strange. My colleague, Rachel, had her eyes fixed on the screen, her posture radiating confidence. She had been quiet throughout the project, mostly lurking in the background, offering suggestions that felt shallow at best. But in that moment, I had no inkling of what was to come. I thought she was as nervous as I was, knowing that today would be the day when our hard work would finally get the recognition it deserved. Rachel stepped forward when it was time to speak. And to my utter disbelief, she began to present my work, word for word. Every idea I had conceived, every insight I had provided, and every strategy one had meticulously designed, she took credit for it. I stood frozen, watching as she received nods and approving glances from the management team. My heart dropped to my stomach, and the blood in my veins felt like ice. This wasn't just a small oversight, it was a full-blown theft. She was explaining my strategy as if it were her own, adding her little touch of flair here and there, but it was unmistakable. Every single element was mine, and yet she was soaking in the praise that I had worked tirelessly to earn. I was sidelined, invisible in the very meeting that I should have dominated. At first, I considered speaking up. But no, that would only make me seem petty and confrontational. Instead, I remained silent. I wasn't going to show her any weakness. Not yet. She didn't know it, but this was only the beginning of her downfall. I wasn't going to let this slide, not after everything I had sacrificed for the success of this project. As the meeting concluded and the room emptied, I walked out quietly, my mind racing. I had to think this through. I had to be smart. If I confronted Rachel now, it would only escalate things, and I'd lose control. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me unravel in front of the team. No, this needed to be handled with precision, with calculation. I went home that evening, still stewing in the injustice of it all. But rather than being consumed by anger, I focused. I began to document every single conversation, every decision, every policy violation that Rachel had made throughout the entire project. I had kept notes on everything, from the initial brainstorming sessions to the countless hours we had spent developing the framework. Rachel had made numerous errors that I had corrected on my own. She had skirted deadlines and ignored key stakeholders. And yet, she was taking credit for it all. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I was going to make sure that when the time came, it would not be my word against hers. It would be her mistakes versus her claims. It was only a matter of time before the lies began to unravel. And when they did, I would be ready. Over the next few weeks, I maintained a cool, calculated exterior. To everyone at work, I was the professional I had always been, polite, reserved, and ever the team player. But inside, I was building something much more intricate. I wasn't going to confront Rachel directly, at least not yet. I was going to wait for the perfect moment to let everything implode on its own. Rachel, on the other hand, seemed completely oblivious to the storm that was brewing. She walked around the office with a sense of superiority, as if she had done something monumental by presenting my work as her own. She began to take on more leadership roles in the project, assuming control over aspects she had no business overseeing. Each time she made a decision, I took note. Each time she violated company protocols or misrepresented facts, I made sure to have the documentation ready. I knew exactly where her weaknesses were, and I was patient. Meanwhile, the higher-ups, who had once been so impressed with my efforts, now turned to Rachel for guidance. It was as if they had forgotten I existed entirely. The more they praised her, the more my resolve hardened. She had betrayed me, and I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. It wasn't just about getting the credit I deserved anymore, it was about making sure Rachel understood the true cost of her deceit. But I had to be smart. I knew she was playing the game in front of everyone, but I was going to make sure her cards were stacked against her when the truth came out. I began laying the groundwork. It started small. I would casually mention her mistakes in meetings, presenting them as concerns, without directly implicating her. I'd make sure the right people heard about the discrepancies in her work, but in a way that seemed like a mere observation. Hey, I noticed this, here and there, subtly planting the seeds of doubt. At the same time, I continued documenting everything. I knew that at some point, she would slip up. No one could keep up a perfect facade forever. She had already made enough small mistakes to fill a binder, but I knew her ego would eventually lead her to make a fatal error. And when that happened, I'd be waiting. Then, one day, it came. We were in a team meeting, discussing the progress of the project. Rachel, as usual, was standing at the front of the room, giving her update on the status. She was talking about a particular strategy, one that I had devised and executed flawlessly, but which she had somehow misrepresented as her own work. She confidently laid out her vision for the next phase, not even bothering to mention the original plan that I had painstakingly put together. I could see the senior leadership team nodding, impressed by her confidence, but what I noticed was the small but telling glance exchanged between Mark, our lead strategist, and Sarah, the head of operations. They were paying attention. They weren't entirely convinced by Rachel's explanations. It was subtle, but I could see it. They knew something wasn't adding up. I had planted enough doubts in their minds, and now they were starting to question her competence. Rachel, oblivious to this, continued her presentation, but it was clear her confidence was faltering. She didn't realize that her little empire of lies was beginning to crumble. The perfect moment had arrived. I stood up, interrupting her mid-sentence. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. The strategy you're presenting here is actually based on the original framework I put together a few months ago. The timeline, the approach, all of it, it was my design. I'd be happy to walk everyone through the details if you'd like. The room fell silent. Rachel froze, her face momentarily going pale. The senior leadership team turned their attention toward me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the power of control shift back to me. I wasn't raising my voice, I wasn't accusing her, I was merely stating the facts. Rachel tried to recover, stammering out some half-baked explanation, but it was clear she was floundering. The cracks in her facade were beginning to show, and she didn't know how to cover them up. She had been playing a dangerous game, thinking she could ride the wave of her stolen glory without consequence. But now, the truth was slipping out, and I had set the stage for her to face the music. The rest of the meeting was a blur. I didn't need to say much more. The leadership team began asking questions, digging into the details of the project. And as they did, it became clear that Rachel's involvement had been minimal. She had taken credit for ideas and plans that weren't hers, misrepresented the project's progress, and glossed over key decisions that she had failed to execute. I didn't need to do anything else. The more she tried to cover her tracks, the deeper she dug herself into a hole. By the end of the meeting, I could see the shift in how everyone looked at her. There was no longer any doubt about where the credit was due, and who had been trying to take it all for themselves. In the days that followed, the impact of that meeting rippled through the office like a shockwave. Rachel, who had once been the golden child in the eyes of the management, suddenly found herself in the hot seat. Questions that had once been directed at me were now aimed at her. It was fascinating to watch as the tables turned, though it wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be. No, the real satisfaction would come later. It was about setting the stage for her downfall, piece by piece. The first sign that she was beginning to feel the pressure came a couple of days after the meeting, during a one-on-one with Mark, the lead strategist. I overheard a portion of their conversation in the hallway. Rachel was trying to justify her actions, explaining how the project had evolved and how different circumstances had led to changes. It was a weak defense, and even from my spot in the hallway, I could see Mark's skepticism. He wasn't buying it. I didn't interfere. I didn't need to. Her own mistakes were piling up, and the weight of them was becoming too heavy for her to carry. Her explanations were starting to fall apart, and the people who had once backed her were slowly backing away. Meanwhile, I continued to keep a close watch. I was no longer directly involved in the project. After all, Rachel had taken over as the lead on it, but I made sure I was aware of every meeting, every decision. If she stumbled, I would be there to collect the pieces. It was becoming more and more obvious to those around us that the project was floundering under her leadership. And it wasn't just the project that was falling apart. Rachel herself seemed increasingly anxious, walking through the office with her head down, avoiding eye contact with people she had once been so friendly with. She would laugh off her mistakes, but it was clear to me that she was beginning to feel the weight of the lies she had told. She was cracking under the pressure, and it was beautiful to witness. But the real turning point came when I got a tip from an unexpected source, Sarah, the head of operations. She had been quietly observing Rachel's erratic behavior and had started to dig into some of the inconsistencies in her reports. Sarah had always been a stickler for details, and when she realized that Rachel had submitted reports that didn't add up, she took it to HR. That was when things started to get serious. Rachel was called into HR for a meeting, and from the look on her face when she came out, I knew it wasn't going well. She tried to put on a brave face, but I could tell her mind was racing. She was worried. She had no idea what was coming for her. But I did. And I wasn't done yet. I had been quietly compiling all of Rachel's mistakes, her lies, her violations of company policy, and I was ready to use them. I wasn't about to let her get away with the damage she had done to my career, to my reputation. I was building the case, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the days went by, I made sure to stay out of the limelight. I wasn't trying to draw attention to myself, I wasn't boasting or gloating. I was simply biding my time, keeping my cards close to my chest. I knew that when the time came, I would hold all the power. Rachel wouldn't stand a chance. Then came the day I'd been waiting for. It was a Thursday afternoon when I received an email from HR, asking me to come in for a meeting. The subject line was vague, something about project performance and feedback. I knew exactly what it meant. Rachel had tried to pin the blame on me, of course, but I had already anticipated this. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks. I knew how to handle it. I walked into the meeting room with the confidence of someone who was certain of their victory. HR had pulled together a few of Rachel's more glaring mistakes, and I was there to fill in the blanks. I had the evidence, the documentation, the receipts. And I wasn't afraid to use them. The meeting was brief. HR had already done some digging of their own, and when I presented my evidence, it was clear that Rachel had no defense. She had violated company policies, misrepresented data, and taken credit for work she hadn't done. And the best part? She had no idea I was the one behind it all. The HR representative looked at Rachel with a mixture of disappointment and frustration. She had been a promising employee once, but her actions had betrayed the trust of the company. As Rachel sat there, sweating and red-faced, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This was my revenge. This was the consequence of her betrayal. But I didn't stop there. I had more in store. The next step was to ensure that the fallout wasn't just contained within the company. I wasn't going to let Rachel slink away with just a reprimand. No, she had to face real consequences for what she had done. I made one final call, this time to the external auditing team. I knew exactly what they were looking for, and I made sure they knew exactly where to look. A few hours later, they were investigating Rachel's financial discrepancies and the questionable funds that had been funneled into the project under her name. By the time Rachel realized what had happened, it was too late. The audit was already in progress, and the full extent of her misconduct was being uncovered. I was done with the waiting. This was the moment I had orchestrated. Rachel wasn't just losing her job. She was losing everything. By the time the external audit concluded, it was clear that Rachel's scheme had gone much deeper than anyone had anticipated. The financial discrepancies, her falsified reports, and the way she had manipulated the project's progress to suit her narrative were all laid bare. Her career at the company was finished, but I wasn't content with just watching her falter. No, the psychological payback was just beginning. Rachel had always prided herself on her polished, confident demeanor, but now, that exterior was crumbling. She walked around the office like a ghost, her face a constant mask of fear and frustration. I noticed the way she avoided eye contact with everyone, how she shrank in the presence of the senior leadership team. She had become a pariah. No one trusted her anymore, and no one believed her stories. The wheels of her own lies had turned against her, and now she was the one trying to salvage the shattered pieces of her reputation. I had made sure that she was publicly shamed, but there was no need for me to continue to press her. I had already won. The silence in the office was deafening when she entered a room. Conversations would stop, and people would turn their backs. I couldn't help but feel a sense of cold satisfaction at the sight. She had thought she could take what was mine and get away with it. Now she was paying the price, and she didn't even know the full extent of it yet. The thing about Rachel was that she had always been clever, smart enough to manipulate others, smart enough to cover her tracks. But what she hadn't counted on was my ability to play the long game. I hadn't needed to confront her right away. I hadn't needed to make a scene. I had simply let her dig herself deeper, knowing that eventually, she would trip over her own lies. And she did. As the weeks wore on, Rachel's desperation became more evident. She began reaching out to former colleagues, trying to regain some semblance of normalcy. She reached out to me once, asking if we could talk about the project. I knew exactly what she wanted, to beg me for forgiveness, to somehow get me on her side so she could weasel her way out of the consequences. I ignored her messages. I didn't need to rub salt in her wounds. She was already suffering enough. The whispers around the office were enough of a punishment. She had become the object of ridicule. No one wanted to work with her anymore. And I knew she realized, too late, that her days of pretending to be the office star were over. But then, one morning, I received an unexpected email. It was from HR, asking me to come in for a private meeting. At first, I thought it was just routine, but as I walked into the room and saw the somber faces of the HR representatives, I realized something was off. "David," one of them began, "we've received a formal complaint from Rachel. She claims that you've been spreading rumors about her, sabotaging her reputation, and creating a hostile work environment." I felt a slight flicker of amusement, though I masked it with a serious expression. It was classic Rachel, wasn't it? She was going down, and now she was trying to drag me down with her. The audacity. The nerve. But I wasn't worried. Not in the least. I calmly responded, "I can assure you, I've done no such thing. I've merely made sure that the facts surrounding the project were understood. If Rachel feels that the truth is damaging to her, then perhaps she should reconsider the actions that led us here." There was a pause as the HR team took in my response. I could see they were trying to gauge whether I was being truthful or evasive. "David," the other HR representative said, "we've reviewed the situation thoroughly, and the records we've compiled indicate that Rachel's claims are baseless. However, we want to make sure that we've addressed all angles. Is there anything you'd like to add?" I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice steady and calm. I've always been professional in my conduct. I've followed company protocols. If there's a problem with that, perhaps Rachel should take a look at her own actions before pointing fingers. They nodded, and I could tell they were satisfied with my response. Rachel's attempt to implicate me had backfired, and there was no way for her to shift the blame. It wasn't just the project that had destroyed her career, it was her own inability to take responsibility for her actions. As I left the meeting, I could hear the faintest hint of a smile creeping onto my face. Rachel was grasping at straws, and every attempt to drag me down was just another indication of how thoroughly she had lost control. I wasn't worried, not even for a second. I had known from the start that I could outplay her at every turn. But the most satisfying part of it all was watching Rachel unravel. It wasn't just her career that was falling apart, it was her sense of self. She had always seen herself as the office queen, the one who had all the answers, the one who could manipulate everyone around her with her charm and wit. Now, that persona was shattered. People no longer feared her. They no longer looked up to her. They saw her for what she really was, a fraud. She had underestimated me, and now she was paying the price. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to destroy my career, she had destroyed her own. And the best part? She was completely oblivious to how much worse it was going to get for her. As Rachel's career continued to spiral downward, the whispers around the office grew louder. She was now a shadow of the confident colleague she once was, reduced to a cautionary tale. The senior leadership team began to distance themselves from her, and her once pristine reputation had been irreparably damaged. But I wasn't satisfied yet. No, the final blow was still to come, and it would come when she least expected it. I knew Rachel well enough to understand that she wasn't going to go down without a fight. She would try to make a comeback, to shift the narrative. She had too much pride to simply walk away in silence. But I had prepared for this moment. After the HR incident, where Rachel had tried and failed to pin the blame on me, I knew she would try to reach out to the higher-ups. She would try to salvage whatever she could, perhaps even attempt to salvage some semblance of her reputation. I had no intention of letting her succeed. I was going to make sure the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. I started by reaching out to a few of the team members who had once worked closely with Rachel. I didn't need to twist their arms or offer bribes. The truth was all the leverage I needed. As they shared their experiences with me, it became clear that Rachel had been consistently dishonest with the team, undermining their work and taking credit for ideas that weren't hers. I knew that some of these colleagues had kept their own notes on Rachel's failures, and I was happy to help them get their voices heard. After all, in a company where reputation was everything, they weren't going to risk standing by a woman who had just been exposed as a liar and a manipulator. I had learned long ago that if you wanted to truly bring someone down, you didn't need to do the dirty work yourself. You just needed to push the right buttons, make the right connections, and let them destroy themselves. That was exactly what I had done with Rachel, and now it was about to pay off. A few days later, I received an unexpected message from Mark, the lead strategist. His tone was neutral, but I could tell there was a certain sense of finality to it. "David, I'd like to meet with you to discuss some things regarding the project." I agreed, of course, and when I showed up for the meeting, I could see the weight of the situation on his face. This wasn't about the project anymore. No, this was about Rachel, and the way her actions had finally caught up with her. "David," Mark began, looking tired, "we've been reviewing the final reports for the project. There are a lot of inconsistencies, and a few things just don't add up. Some of the figures Rachel presented in her report are off. And we've noticed that certain key decisions weren't documented properly. We need to be clear on where things went wrong." I leaned forward, steely-eyed, knowing that this was the moment I'd been waiting for. I didn't hesitate. I laid everything out, each point carefully and methodically, showing how Rachel had manipulated the situation and failed to follow proper protocols. The evidence I had gathered over the past few weeks spoke for itself. Rachel's mistakes weren't just technical, she had violated company policies, misrepresented figures, and actively tried to take credit for my work. Her mistakes weren't just missteps, they were deliberate acts of deceit. As I spoke, I could see the look in Mark's eyes shift from skepticism to realization. He had always been a careful observer, and now, he was seeing the full extent of Rachel's betrayal. It wasn't just a series of small errors, it was a pattern of behavior. It was deliberate, and it was toxic. "We need to take this to HR," Mark said, his voice low. "This can't be ignored." And just like that, I had set the final trap. I wasn't the one calling the shots anymore. I had made sure that Mark and others had all the pieces, and now, it was out of my hands. The next day, I received the news that HR had officially launched a full investigation into Rachel's conduct. There was no turning back for her now. The paperwork was being filed, the investigation was underway, and the senior leadership team had been briefed on the full scope of her deceit. Rachel tried to fight it, of course. She tried to convince anyone who would listen that she had been misunderstood, that she had made a few honest mistakes. But the company wasn't buying it. Too many people had come forward, too many discrepancies had been uncovered, and the evidence was irrefutable. The worst part for Rachel? She realized too late that no one was on her side. The senior leadership team, who had once hailed her as the next big thing, now looked at her with disdain. The trust had been broken, and there was no coming back from that. They began to publicly distance themselves from her, and her name was quietly erased from the project. Her glory was gone, and with it, her career. That was the final moment of her fall, but it didn't stop there. No, I had one more card to play. I knew that once she was out of the company, she would be left scrambling for work, her reputation shattered. I made sure that the information about her behavior, her deceit, her manipulation, her failures, would follow her. Word spread to other companies, and no one would touch her. She had burned too many bridges, and now, she had nowhere left to go. It was beautiful, watching her fade into obscurity, knowing that every move she made was being shadowed by her past actions. She had become a cautionary tale, a warning to anyone who thought they could take credit for someone else's hard work without consequence. As for me, I had reclaimed everything she had tried to steal from me, and then some. I had played the game with precision and patience, and in the end, I was the one who walked away victorious. Rachel had learned the hard way: betray me, and the consequences would be far more severe than she could ever imagine. It had been a few weeks since Rachel's departure, and things at the office had settled into a quiet, almost eerie normalcy. The project that she had once claimed as her own was now back in the hands of the team I had originally assembled, and it was moving forward at a steady pace. The leadership team, though still hesitant about the fall from grace Rachel had suffered, knew better than to question the outcome. The truth had come out, and no one in the company was going to forget it. As for Rachel, she had vanished from the office without much fanfare. The suddenness of it all was jarring. One day, she was walking the halls, still holding on to some semblance of authority and influence. The next, she was a ghost. The emails stopped, the meetings she had once dominated were now led by someone else, and the office, once rife with whispers about her success, was now only filled with murmurs about her downfall. And though I hadn't been the one to do the final damage, Rachel had done that all on her own. The whispers about her were still loud enough to carry. The real beauty of it all was in the long-term fallout. She couldn't hide from it, no matter how hard she tried. I had played my part in exposing the truth. But what came after her departure, the way people viewed her, the way she was slowly erased from the narrative, well, that was the part that gave me the deepest satisfaction. She was left with nothing but her tarnished name, her burned bridges, and a life she had tried so desperately to control. And while the office was quiet about Rachel's downfall, I knew the real consequences were still catching up to her. I had made sure of that. A month later, I was on a business trip in another city when I received a call from Mark. It was late, and I hadn't expected to hear from him. His tone was serious, urgent. "David, I need to talk to you about something," he said, his voice low and measured. "Everything okay?" I asked, sitting up in bed. "I just got off the phone with Rachel," Mark said. "She reached out to me today. Apparently, she's trying to get back into the industry. She's contacted a few headhunters, and she's using the company's name to vouch for her. I don't know what kind of leverage she thinks she still has, but she's clearly trying to make a comeback. I let the words sink in, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. Why are you telling me this? I asked, already knowing the answer. Because I don't want her to do to someone else what she did to you. I think we both know she's not going to change, and if she lands another job in this industry, she'll use the same tactics to climb back to the top. Mark's concern was valid. Rachel had always been ruthless, and I knew if she found her footing again, it would only be a matter of time before she started manipulating the next group of people to take what wasn't hers. It was who she was, ambitious to a fault, willing to sacrifice anyone to advance herself. But I had a better idea. I wasn't about to let her rise from the ashes of her destruction. Not on my watch. Let's make sure she doesn't get the chance, I said, my voice steady. I'll take care of it. I spent the next few days quietly working behind the scenes. I wasn't going to let Rachel's name slip back into the spotlight. I knew exactly where to start. I had connections with industry peers, colleagues I'd worked with in the past who trusted me. I made a few calls, planted a few seeds. I wasn't going to ruin her chances directly, no, that would be too obvious. But I made sure that the people she reached out to knew exactly who she was. It wasn't about ruining her, it was about ensuring she couldn't fool anyone else again. I'd seen how far she was willing to go to manipulate others for her own gain. I wasn't going to give her that opportunity again. Within a week, I started to hear whispers. One by one, the headhunters she'd contacted had turned her down. They weren't calling her back, and they weren't responding to her emails. The word was out. Rachel had become a liability in the industry, a cautionary tale of how even the brightest stars could fall when they were too focused on themselves. Her silence became deafening. It was the kind of silence that signaled defeat, the kind that made her question whether her ambitions had been worth it. I could almost imagine her sitting at home, staring at her phone, wondering why the opportunities she once had at her fingertips had evaporated. But it wasn't over yet. I had one more card to play. A few weeks later, Rachel posted something on LinkedIn. It was a brief, almost desperate statement about her new journey, how she was ready to move forward, and how grateful she was for the lessons she had learned. I couldn't help but laugh. It was a classic move. She was trying to rewrite the narrative, trying to salvage some semblance of professionalism, but the damage was done. The industry wasn't buying her sob story. Her name had become synonymous with deceit, and no amount of carefully crafted words could change that. And that's when I struck. I had a few close contacts who worked in the media, and I subtly made sure they were aware of Rachel's past. I didn't need to go into the details, just enough to make sure they had the full picture of her career. I made sure the right people saw that LinkedIn post. A few days later, an article appeared. It wasn't sensationalized, but it was enough. It was a well-written, factual account of the rise and fall of a once promising employee who had allowed her ambitions to cloud her judgment. It wasn't a hit piece, but it wasn't a glowing profile either. It was a reminder to everyone in the industry of what had happened, and why Rachel's fall from grace had been inevitable. The article made sure that anyone who even thought about hiring her knew exactly who they were dealing with. Her attempts to rebuild her career were over before they even began. Months had passed since Rachel's downfall, and though the immediate storm had passed, I couldn't help but feel a certain sense of finality in everything. I had taken every step with a purpose, and the results spoke for themselves. Her name had been erased from the narrative, her reputation in ruins, and the career she had so carefully crafted for herself had come to a sudden and permanent halt. It was a strange feeling, standing in the wake of it all. Watching her try, and fail, at every attempt to claw her way back was, in a way, a bit anticlimactic. I had always imagined that once I succeeded in taking her down, I'd feel a sense of satisfaction, even a thrill. But the truth was, once the job was done, it felt empty. There was no joy in watching someone else suffer, even if they had wronged you. No, the real victory was something much quieter, something that lingered in the small moments. I had reclaimed the recognition I deserved for the project. The leadership team had acknowledged my role in it, and the spotlight, however fleeting, was now on me. The rest of the team had continued to work without the toxic influence that Rachel had once wielded. For the first time in months, the office felt like a place where I could actually breathe, where things could be about work and not about manipulation. Still, Rachel's downfall wasn't a story that could be told without some lingering effects. The damage she had caused to the morale of the team was real. Even though she was gone, the way she had undermined everyone's contributions left a bitterness that took time to wash away. The project, which should have been a testament to our collective work, was now remembered for the drama that had followed in its wake. Her manipulation had clouded the achievements we had made, and even though I had reclaimed the narrative for myself, I knew that some part of it would always be tainted by her actions. It wasn't just the project that had been affected. It was the culture of the office, the way trust had been eroded, the way people looked at each other with suspicion, wondering who was going to be the next to try and take what wasn't theirs. That, more than anything, would be the long-term consequence of Rachel's betrayal. It would take time to rebuild, to trust again, and to heal the wounds she had left behind. But I wasn't worried about that. I had done my part. I had played the long game, had waited patiently, and now I was standing on the other side, my integrity intact. Rachel had thought she could tear down everything I had worked for, but in the end, it had only strengthened my resolve. It wasn't just about getting the credit, it was about making sure that people like Rachel understood the price of betrayal. The price of dishonesty. The price of greed. I had moved forward with my career, and I was finally starting to feel like myself again. But just when I thought I was done with the whole ordeal, something unexpected happened. A reminder that no one truly escapes their past. It came in the form of a message. It was late one night, and I was relaxing at home, catching up on some reading when my phone buzzed. It was a LinkedIn notification from an unfamiliar name. At first, I thought it was just a generic connection request. But then I saw the message. "David," it started, "I hope this finds you well. I wanted to reach out regarding Rachel's recent situation. I've heard some things about her and I wanted to get your side of the story before making any decisions. Would love to talk." My heart sank. It was a recruiter. Someone who had clearly done their homework and was aware of Rachel's reputation, and now, for whatever reason, had decided to reach out to me. The first thought that crossed my mind was that she was trying to make a comeback. She had somehow found her way into the industry again, and now she was reaching out to me for some kind of validation, or perhaps to try and rebuild some sort of rapport. I didn't even have to think about it for long. I had spent too much time being affected by Rachel's manipulations, too much time letting her actions shape the narrative of my career. I wasn't going to let her try and worm her way back into my life, or into anyone else's. I responded quickly, my fingers tapping out the words with precision. Rachel's situation isn't something that requires any explanation from me. The facts are available, and I've already provided them. If you're looking for someone to give her a second chance, I wouldn't advise it. Her actions speak for themselves. I paused for a moment, knowing that I could have said more, but I didn't need to. That was the beauty of it. Rachel had already written her story. I had no reason to continue telling it for her. The recruiter didn't respond right away, but I knew that my message would do the trick. Rachel's name would not be rehabilitated by me. I would not be her stepping stone. The next day, I checked my LinkedIn inbox, and sure enough, the message had been removed. The recruiter had clearly made their decision. And with that, Rachel's last desperate attempt to rebuild her career had been squashed. It was moments like these that reminded me, sometimes the most effective revenge isn't in the confrontation, it's in the silence. In ensuring that someone who once thought they could control the narrative is left with nothing but the echoes of their own failure. I didn't need to fight Rachel anymore. She had already lost. It had been a full year since Rachel's fall from grace, and looking back, the entire experience felt like something out of a distant memory. The initial anger, the frustration, the drive for revenge, it all seemed so insignificant now. What had once been a battle of wits had become a distant chapter, a chapter that, in the end, had no real power over me anymore. I had emerged from the ordeal stronger, more respected, and more aware of how fragile trust could be in the workplace. But perhaps the most important lesson I had learned was that true victory doesn't come from the downfall of others, it comes from maintaining your own integrity, no matter how messy the situation gets. Rachel was gone, and with her went all the drama and toxicity she had brought into the office. The project that had once been overshadowed by her deceit was now seen for what it truly was, a testament to the work I had done. My career had only grown stronger, and as I looked around the office, I saw new opportunities blooming, new colleagues who respected my work, and a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. But even as I moved on, there were occasional reminders of Rachel's downfall. Occasionally, I would hear someone mention her name in passing, usually in a whisper, always with an air of discomfort. Her legacy had been sealed, not in her success, but in her failure. The office had moved on, but no one had forgotten. One day, as I sat in my office, a familiar email came through. It was from HR. David, the subject line read. We are writing to inform you of a formal decision regarding the outcome of Rachel's appeal. I wasn't surprised. I had known this was coming. Rachel had spent the last few months trying to challenge the company's decision, attempting to get her job back, making the same arguments that had failed her all those months ago. It was all too predictable. I opened the email. The contents were short, to the point. The company had upheld their decision. Rachel would not be reinstated, nor would she be eligible for future opportunities within the company. But there was one more line that made me pause. However, we also wanted to acknowledge that while her actions were damaging, the situation has led to some improvements in company policies regarding transparency and accountability. We appreciate your role in helping us understand what went wrong. The last part stung, but not because it was undeserved. No, it was the fact that Rachel's actions had led to these changes, and I had played a role in making sure the company never let something like this happen again. It wasn't that I wanted a trophy for my involvement. It was just that in the end, everything I had done had been for the greater good, for making sure that future projects wouldn't be tainted by the same kind of manipulation. I stared at the email for a few moments, my thoughts racing. It wasn't just about getting back at her anymore. It was about ensuring that no one could do to someone else what Rachel had done to me. And for that, I was willing to go to any lengths. A few days later, I received a call from an old colleague, someone I had worked with in the past and respected deeply. His voice was serious when he spoke. David, he said, I need to ask you something. We've been looking into some internal candidates for a leadership position, and your name came up. We'd like to offer you the role. The weight of his words hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't just an offer, it was a culmination of everything I had worked for, everything I had fought through, and everything I had endured. I thought about Rachel, about the way she had tried to manipulate her way to the top, how she had used people to climb the corporate ladder. And now, here I was, getting a chance not because I had played the game or taken shortcuts, but because I had done the work, because I had built my career on integrity. I accepted the position, of course. But in that moment, I realized something important. I wasn't just stepping into a new role. I was stepping into a future where I no longer had to look over my shoulder, where I no longer had to worry about someone like Rachel undermining my success. As I sat in my new office, looking out over the city skyline, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. The year had been tumultuous, filled with challenges and moments of self-doubt. But in the end, I had come out on top. Rachel had been a footnote in my story, a reminder of how easily people can be swept up in their own ego and ambition, and how those same traits can lead to their downfall. I had taken the high road, played the long game, and in the end, I was the one who had triumphed. She had learned the hard way that betrayal, no matter how cunningly executed, always has consequences. She had tried to take everything I had worked for, and in the end, it had been her that lost everything. And as I sat in that office, in my new role, I smiled. The revenge had been sweet, not because of the destruction it caused, but because it showed me who I was. It showed me that no one could take what was rightfully mine, and that the greatest revenge is simply outliving and outworking those who try to bring you down. This, I thought, is how you truly win.